Yo, you're watching Slick Sam Sells You, the show where we sell you to advertisers, which makes us pretty much identical to every other YouTuber, except unlike some YouTubers, we really bombed hard on our last episode. Wow, down about like 40% or something. Honestly, that's pretty bad. I expected some drop off, but not for all of you to just leave at once. Wow. So it's clear that I guess most people are losing interest in this experiment. Either that or someone at Google has lost interest in this experiment and made a little change, I don't know. Probably the former. We're such a small channel, I feel like we shouldn't be individually picked on, but you never know. I suppose the best thing to do would be to examine our format and look at what else is amazingly successful and try to figure out why we're not doing well. So, for example, in the past we've had Men Who Play Video Games. That was amazing, and then there was also Puppet Who Plays Video Games. And then there was Anime Girl Who Plays Video Game. And you know what I think? I think that we've got the video game part. That's totally nailed down. What we need is to be with the times. That's why I'm gonna relaunch this as Slick Sam Has Boobs, which you can see right there in the corner. From now on, I need you guys to use your imagination to pretend that I am a young, vivacious... Oh god, who am I kidding? I'm so sorry about this. I just realized this is never gonna work. Because this new VTuber fad actually has a bunch of companies behind it, and we don't have that kind of wealth and impact. Shoot! Oh, that and I can't draw boobs. God, look at these. Do these look right? I don't think so. Oh well. I guess instead, we'll just go ahead and wrap up this video series and examine what we learned. In a nutshell, nothing. It turns out we have very little control over anything involving our channel. Most attempts I made to try to enact a change, or find something that we could actually fiddle with from our end, just turned up with bupkis. The recommended videos are determined by you, the viewers. The statistics show that nobody clicks the end cards that recommend videos to you from my videos. The advertising seems to be just based on whoever's paying the most at the time. And as we've all known for a long time now, being subscribed to a channel doesn't even mean you're gonna see any new videos. Everything is really kind of under Google's control, and they decide everything from their own side. But I will say one thing did surprise me. I found it pretty interesting that when we looked for Joe Biden, we turned up kinda similar results regardless of our political affiliations. Now there's a bit to unpack here, but basically, whenever they do research that I read about on YouTube, they show that conservative views are actually pushed a great deal more than left-wing views. However, if you try to verify that for yourself by just, say, typing in a politician's name, then that doesn't appear to be the case. Now I actually had a conversation with someone where I believed that there was an information vacuum, and one of the reasons why people were becoming incredibly polarized politically was because they did not have access to other points of view. They were only being shown things that reinforced one point of view. But I guess if you can search for another point of view and find it, then to some extent, my expectation is flawed. So at this point, what I think the issue is that everyone has a model on Google that tells Google who you are. And you can look for things outside of that model if you want. If you know you want to look up Joe Biden, then you can just type in the name and get results from CNN, even though normally you would never touch CNN. Of course, their system, their model for you, quickly learns that you won't touch CNN, and they do want to keep you engaged and on the platform, so if you don't watch it, they drop you off instantly, just as they dropped you off of Slick Sam as soon as they realized you didn't want to watch it. It really happened instantly. For example, here's something positive. Recently, a friend of mine showed me an animation about Dungeons and Dragons. It was like 20 minutes long, but I watched the entire thing. After that, I suddenly started getting recommendations for other channels that did animated commentary on Dungeons and Dragons. I was a little shocked because these videos seemed to be a lot of effort, and I previously thought that that sort of thing was totally dead. But in reality, it was just that I couldn't find it because I didn't know what to search to find it manually, and it was never showing up in my recommended feed because it had never been introduced to my model. Unfortunately, this has a sad ending, because although I watched several of this guy's videos and I'd like to see them again, eventually I quit clicking on the videos because I wanted to go on and do something else, and then a few days later I was still not clicking on those videos, and suddenly they vanished from my feed in favor of the stuff that I will watch more normally, such as music. Now, I don't actually remember the name of that YouTube channel, so I don't know if I can find it again, and the original video that led me to it was actually a smaller channel that they siphoned me away from to send me to a bigger channel, because this channel that I was watching had like millions of views, whereas the original channel only had several 100,000 views. So in a nutshell, YouTube saw that I was introduced to some kind of interesting high-effort content, and that I watched it and enjoyed it. So it picked me up and moved me away to a bigger channel that had similar content and let me watch that until it decided I was no longer engaged, and then it cut me off. But the thing is, I would still be a welcome consumer to either of the channels that they cut me off from. It's not that I disliked them. In fact, I thought it was nice that they were some of the better content on YouTube I've seen in a long time. It's just that I apparently didn't engage enough. So, my theory with the whole Joe Biden thing is that it reveals that while you can go and look for content you haven't seen, and you can even click it and watch it, if you don't continue to engage with that type of content, it will eventually disappear from your feed. And so when you log on to YouTube or do other types of things with Google, then you'll be brought back to your usual ruts. That is to say, Google will remind you to watch the videos that you agree with. If you're right-wing, then it'll show you right-wing content and say, hey, this guy updated. You engage with this. And if you're left-wing, it'll show you the left-wing stuff and say, hey, you engage with that. But if you watched one left-wing video, it's not going to show you another left-wing video unless you're consistently keeping up with them. Just like it won't show me a D&D video, even though I clearly liked it, at least from my own perspective. Fact is, I listen to music more often than I listen to that D&D stuff, so it just took me right back to the music and then phased out the D&D channel. Not only that, but it also is trying to concentrate views, right? Like, I think that the first channel I watched probably wasn't getting good promotion because maybe they didn't update often enough. It looked like their videos were very long and required a lot of effort. It was animation completely throughout, whereas the videos that they took me to was actually animating much more frequently. They had a team of animators, and so they were able to release stuff faster. This means I'm gonna look at more videos, and I'm gonna see more ads, and I'm gonna stay on YouTube for longer. So, if you're very political, if you respond to political content, probably you get shuffled off to the same place as everyone else who kinda has that same mindset, and that's why everyone's kinda seeing the same thing in their own little bubbles. You're not being shown individual YouTubers who are neat for you. The system is figuring out what you're into, and then just shuffling you all to a big pile. That also means, of course, that YouTube isn't really looking for users who are interested in whatever you're making videos about, if you're making videos for YouTube. What YouTube will do is look at those people, figure out what they'll watch, and then pick them up and move them away to a channel with more viewership because the ads are better there. I say this having experimented with Google's advertising. There was a period where I was trying to advertise videos through Google's system, and I tried a couple of different videos to see what would stick. It turns out, though, that although people would come in, and we could see they were watching the videos, and we could even see that maybe we were getting new subscribers, they would then just kind of siphon away, and we wouldn't see any sustained change in viewership for the better. I think what happened to us was the same thing that happened to that D&D channel that I watched. I saw it, and I liked it, and then Google found something else that was similar and they just moved me over. And without thinking much about it, I went ahead and moved over to that other channel. And then I saw nothing as far as promotion for that first channel. They may have gotten me into that flow, but as far as Google was concerned, they are dead. As dead as my car after sitting out in the lot going nowhere for most of the pandemic. True story, by the way, my car's actually dead. So anyway, I guess what I can infer from this, if my theory is right, is that there are many points of entry towards certain sections of YouTube. So if you're going to be politically radical, there are many different doorways you can go through to reach that radical level. But regardless, YouTube is going to try to move you towards whatever is most profitable for them in that sphere. And that's why everyone kind of seems to have the same crazy ideas right now, and everyone seems like they're reading off a script. Because although they each had unique experiences getting to that point, they all got to the same point. Now, how would you test something like this? Well, it's outside the purview of our channel, that's for sure. But basically, you'd probably do some kind of longitudinal study, where you'd find a very large sample of people, and then you'd ask them to report their YouTube viewing habits until you have a decent picture of what it is that they're looking at and how they got there. Now, it would require a lot of honesty and upkeep from the people doing it, and you have to pay people for that sort of thing generally, which means that it's very expensive, and this is a problem. Any kind of longitudinal study tends to be quite expensive. We could try to keep you entertained doing that stuff for a certain amount of time, but it looks like the limit to that level of entertainment is like, I don't know, 8 videos or something. Anyway, though, on that note, let's back up and let's talk about the scientific method, because this is something I feel like we can't stress enough. A lot of people, especially those of you in the US, I know don't get that good of an education on what the scientific method is or how science actually works in practicality. In fact, some of you even have degrees, sometimes higher level degrees, and then you don't really get a firm education on how science works. It's the strangest thing. So let's talk about that. I had one guy, he was crazy, but all the same, he said, this is not science, what we're doing right here. And it is science. The thing is that when you talk about studies, you're not always trying to look for a conclusion. Sometimes you're trying to look for the next question. Actually, in fact, most of the times, you're just trying to look for the next question. Like, for example, let's suppose you're a geneticist and you are trying to figure out what it is in people that makes them more likely to be addicted to things. And let's suppose you decide you're going to test this with nicotine. So you could take a bunch of fruit flies and see if you could breed them to prefer nicotine. And then continue a line, and you would have like a breed of fruit flies that you've created that specifically enjoys nicotine. So you would gather up a bunch of fruit flies, and you would put varying levels of nicotine in their food, which they also like to lay eggs in. And then you see how many of them lay more eggs in the nicotine, and you keep growing the families that are laying eggs in nicotine and see if there's any difference. Well, over the course of a few breeding cycles, if you find that your flies are starting to favor nicotine, then you can say like, well, maybe there's something I've bred in them. And then if I start looking at their genetics, I'm going to see some patterns. But supposing that does work, let's examine the thing, because it turns out that there's a lot of confounds. For example, it could be that if you put those fruit flies in the food, maybe they just have a higher tolerance for it, and they don't mind laying their eggs in it, because they're fine, they don't care. They don't die from it like most flies would. So that's actually what you've bred, it's not that they prefer it more. Or maybe they do prefer it more and you can find some kind of genetic link. The important thing is just that you're asking yourselves questions and eliminating things that could be your other possible answers. But let me tell you where the bigger problem comes in. Let's suppose you do this experiment and you just cannot get these flies to lay their eggs in nicotine like you want. No matter how many generations you breed selectively for whoever's laying their eggs in nicotine, you just can't make it be a behavior that they'll exhibit. This does happen. And then you're stuck because you've got to ask a totally new question. You got to go back to the drawing board. Your original idea just doesn't work. There are many studies which could go on for some length of time only to arrive at that sort of failure. And because studies require money, this is often a fiasco. Sometimes you even get professors who are incentivized to lie or sort of fudge the numbers or draw conclusions that aren't really there because they want to keep getting their grant money and not admit that they basically just frittered away everything on a wild goose chase. And this has been especially bad over the years for sociology and psychology. It's getting better for psychology, but sociology still struggles a lot. I'll get into why that is. It's because sociology mainly is able to do field studies, and this is kind of what we were doing in a way with this YouTube thing. Now, there's a lot of different confounds, things are always changing. So if you're trying to figure out, like, for example, why are people dealing drugs in Washington, D.C., you might go in and have a lot of theories, and you could try to test some things and follow some people and ask some questions, but it would be very hard to isolate any one thing and test for that. Moreover, an even bigger question is asking how you begin your test in the first place, because you've got to have some idea of what you're looking for. And so, for example, when I talk about YouTube and I say, you know, I saw this D&D channel and da-da-da-da-da, that's a whole story with its own internal logic that makes sense when it's told from my perspective. And I have a hunch about why that happened to me, but my hunch could very well be very incorrect. I would have to test it to find out whether or not my hunch is true. The anecdote is just the starting point. It really proves nothing by itself because it's a single data point with just my personal blinders on. Now, unfortunately, anecdotes have got to be probably one of the most popular things that people like to spread around because they're stories. So they're compelling, they're easy to remember, they have a starting point, you know, this happened because that happened, and it all makes sense in your head because it's strung out that way. It may not be true, the conclusions that you're drawing may not be anywhere near true, but it all sounds true, so people love to repeat these things as though they were fact. Regardless of whether or not they are fact, sometimes they're great for starting points, because you say, well, I noticed something weird, can I have you guys also do the same thing and see if there's a pattern that repeats? And so we actually had some of that. For example, with the Joe Biden thing, I looked it up and like I've heard about Google manipulating search results, so I thought, well, maybe I'm more left-leaning when it comes to news because I've been told apparently Reuters is left-leaning now. And so I got CNN, and I assumed that maybe if you were on the right wing, you would see Fox News or something. But it was false. That was not correct at all. So then we were also trying to do things with corollary data. And so corollary data is another starting point for studies. It is not a great place to draw conclusions. But sometimes when you gather up some corollary data, you can see a pattern, and then you might be able to get more granular and try to explore if that pattern is really what you think it is. Now this is another one that it seems very compelling, and it's even more confusing for people because it involves a lot of statistics, and people are so bad at understanding statistics. You would not believe it. There's a lot of ways that you can mishandle statistics and use them to draw very dumb and erroneous conclusions. But basically the way that I used them was I was trying to look for patterns. So for example, we played Genshin Impact and then we saw the corollary data that got us more Genshin Impact advertisements on a Genshin Impact video. And I thought, well, we're on to something. If we play Genshin Impact, we get Genshin Impact advertisements. Of course, that makes sense. So I tried playing Genshin Impact again, even though it violated the rules I set out early on. And then we didn't see more ads. Our viewership dropped off completely, and in fact, we actually saw fewer ads for games in general. So this doesn't necessarily mean that the theory is wrong. Possibly if we played Genshin Impact when they were running a lot of ads, then we would have seen more ads for Genshin Impact. It's maybe that Genshin Impact lessened their ad buy in December, and so we just didn't see as much. This is the problem with field studies, is because things are changing around you and the world is always fluctuating, it's hard to really pin down a single source of data and say, here, this is true, because maybe it's only true right now for a certain set of specific circumstances, which have just changed. Now, if I were an unscrupulous professor, the fact is, my theory that playing Genshin Impact led to more Genshin Impact ads has not technically been disproven. Because things change, and I don't know exactly how much they're spending on Genshin Impact ads right now, it's possible that, I was right. And if I continued to play games that showed up more often, then I would actually see more of those types of ads. I don't know, I would have to do a lot more studies. And like I say, I could publish it and say, well, I had this data that worked out the one time, therefore I'm correct, and I deserve tenure and also more grant money. But of course, I'm not a professor, I don't have tenure, and I don't get grant money. So, all I can say is that that data was very inconclusive and didn't appear to lead into anything. And ultimately, I feel like that's where this has landed, unfortunately. I was really hoping that something was going to emerge, and I would be able to follow it and pull at that little thread until we got some more interesting stuff going on. But, it makes sense that it's all kind of protected from tampering. Because the whole point of YouTube for a lot of people these days is just to tamper with the program, get themselves promoted, and then earn a lot of ad money. You know, it feels like not as many people are really trying to make content now, it's more that they're just trying to game YouTube. I mean, they quit promoting people who are trying to make good content, and so malicious content kind of rose to the top, and I guess that this is just their survival mechanism, is preventing you from being able to influence the system very much from your channel. So I'm sorry to say that's where it is, and like I say, with the big drop in viewership, it would be pretty difficult to do much of anything significant. Not that we were honestly all that significant in the first place. A couple of hundred comments is useful, but not massive. We were making our choices based on like quantities of 8 votes in favor of one thing or another, so it wasn't huge. I'm not sure what we're gonna do next, or what the plan is going forward for the channel in general. For all of our videos, actually, there's just a consistent drop-off in viewership. There is no growth at all. So Slick Sam Has Boobs is not gonna be the next big thing, and probably not just because I have a difficult time drawing volume and depth. But we'll see. So anyway, thanks for everyone who participated. I hope you guys have a fantastic week.